We are all so busy these days, and we're always looking for helpful tips and advice on how to find a better work-life balance. We all have to earn a living and pay the bills, but are you doing enough to look after yourself and your health at the same time? Now, many of us prioritise careers and work, and we're slaving over our computers and mobiles all the time. But does this make you cut corners on your diet, exercise or sleep? I'm Dr. Ben Sinclair, and welcome to Health versus Wealth with Dr. Ben. Our guests share their life experiences and we discuss their challenges in their health and their wealth. I hope their experiences will help you with your life and health. Welcome to Health versus Wealth with me, Dr. Ben. I'm delighted today to be welcoming Alan Kinnaird to the show. He's a financial expert of 30 years experience, and he's also got some lethal dark skills, which I'm intrigued to find out about in the martial arts arena. So Alan, it's so good to have you with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm really excited to be talking to you. I think you and I share Yorkshire in common.
Yeah.
I lived in York for many years, and you've come down today to join us, so it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Now, how did you get into the tough world of finance?
Started in 1987. There was a lot of privatisation working on at the time. Mm-hmm. During the Thatcher years, Thatcher had decided, or the Tory government had decided they wanted to privatise a lot of public businesses. So BT was privatised.
Yeah.
BT, British Petroleum, they were all getting privatised, and that generated a lot of paperwork. So at the time, there was a company called Broker Services in Glasgow, in Queen Street, and they were hiring like crazy to deal with all the paperwork because the system was creaking. So the stock exchange settlement system was creaking under the sheer weight of share applications for new issues in privatised stocks.
So you ended up being recruited in Glasgow?
Yeah, so I must have delivered about 10 billion of stock into the Glasgow exchange.
So you were pretty busy at that point?
Very busy, sometimes working from sort of 7 in the morning till 10 at night sometimes, just in the middle of the privatisation season.
Wow, and I have to be a little bit careful because I understand you're actually quite deadly and trained in lethal martial arts.
Well, yeah, I did early on in my life do Shotokan karate in Cumbernauld, which is my hometown, and got up to the heady heights of black belt at 14.
Fantastic.
And left it a little bit during my teen years and went back to it much later in life.
And I've got this image in my head of you growing up in Glasgow, a tough guy. Was that for self-defence or?
No, it was more just fitness. I realised that outside of football, I wasn't the best football player, but outside of football, there was very limited avenues for you to actually build your fitness up. Mm-hmm. And karate, I could see after a few courses or just a few classes, I could see how it really was a complete holistic work through your body.
Of course.
The thing that fascinated me was it brought you into other areas you knew nothing about. So we would have classes in Tai Chi. Our instructor, Grace Slevin, she was a geography teacher at my school. Yeah. She took the class, she gave up a lot of time for this. And we were taught things like Tai Chi as well, so that's the slow movements you'll see people doing in the park. Mm-hmm. We would go away and watch experts down in Nottingham, brought over from Japan. Wow. Just a whole world opened up. Wow. But the fascinating bit for me initially was the breathing, bringing your heart rate down very quickly, and the process around that, just the basics, in through the nose, out through the mouth, and just feeling your heart rate come down so quickly, even after sort of 90 minutes intense class.
Absolutely, and there's so many benefits of deep breathing. They're only really coming out now, but you obviously accessed them early on through martial arts, which is absolutely fascinating. Now, at school, were you good at mathematics?
I'd say I was average at mathematics, but my thing was arithmetic. So I got very early into the numbers. My dad was an accountant. Okay. So there was a sort of background. When I was about 14, I was building sales ledgers with my dad. Wow. For one of the local businesses that he was helping out, a local factory. Yeah. So I was building up the sales ledgers, and I got very early into making sure all the numbers were spot on.
Right, so you were really good on the...
Yeah, I was good on the numbers.
And interesting, my dad was an accountant too, so it's something else we share. And When we first spoke, we bonded over the fact that our mothers were quite natural in their approach to health. Tell me a bit about your mother and her natural approaches.
Her approach was very much that it wasn't so much a sort of regular discussion, but the feeling from her side of the family was always that where possible you should try and get through life with as little help from the pharmaceutical side. There was no particular reason for that other than we did trust doctors implicitly. We had a same family doctor for years, but our sort of mantra from our mum's side was always try and get through stuff without having to rely too heavily on any prescription.
Absolutely, you know? and my mum was just the same. Prevention is better than cure in that respect. Eating healthily, those healthy remedies. And my grandpa was a GP and lived next door to us, and yet holding those things in juxtaposition, I think, is the best of both worlds, isn't it? Fascinating. So you mentioned the start of your early career in Glasgow. What's your role nowadays?
Nowadays, it's looking after solicitors, chartered accountants, and looking at their underlying clients and trying to make it very simply as tax efficient as possible. So like a lot of the very, very good firms, we start off with the absolute basics. We make sure that people have a pension. We make sure that people have an ISA. And then we look at the inheritance tax. There's a large bit before that, because one of our first questions is protection. So especially with younger families, or especially where someone's got married at 25, or these days it tends to be 30, 35 people get married. One of the first things they forget about is that they've now got offspring, and God forbid something happens to them, do they have enough life assurance? Quite often they've got a vague idea that they're working for, say, ICI or Marks and Spencers, and there's some sort of accident sickness cover in the background. They're not quite sure how much it is. They know that quite often if they pass away in the job, death in harness as they call it, they'll get something like 4 times salary, but they're not sure. So one of my jobs is making sure that people have actually thought about the protection. There's a sort of mantra now within the independent financial advice in the UK, again I'm just talking UK here, to make sure protection issues are covered first. And what we mean is make sure people have enough life assurance, especially in the younger years, you know, where they're looking after a young family, because, you know, if either parent dies, the impact on the income is instant.
And it's cheaper to buy when you're younger, isn't it? Is that right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So get into it early.
Get into early. And the other thing is make sure it's affordable, because the last thing you want to do is start a plan and then cancel it after 9 months.
Of course.
So quite often we'll look at a personal balance sheet. You'll do a health check. We do a sort of MOT of the finances. So we'll look at assets, liabilities, their income and expenditure, and try and make sure that they've got enough money to pay that life assurance bill or accident sickness cover if necessary. I mean, they might well be they're completely covered by their work programs, but if not, it's protection first, and then we look at investments.
That's it. So again, it's prevention rather than remedy, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Which is our mantra as well on Health First Wealth. You've lived some interesting times financially. The economy has been up and down. Tell me about the crash in 1987. I was only 9 years old. What were you doing?
Up to here in paperwork. With all the privatisations. I think probably the busiest time of my life. I think the redundancies came the following year. The mantra at the time was it wouldn't affect us because we were just pushing paperwork. But there was a retrenchment in 88. So quite a few of my colleagues, we went from being a team of 25 down to a team of 5. And that's when I realised how volatile stockbroking can be. And
I believe you had a friend who was maybe having a little bit of difficulty around that time. Can you tell me about that? In terms of when you were having to do a lot of buying and selling? Yeah, so slightly later in my career, I came across a client who English wasn't the first language. And he started trading in huge amounts. And he was trading in FX. And FX is just buying and selling currency. Once you know the basics, it's absolutely simple. But until you learn the basics, it can be quite a difficult trade. And he was getting mixed up between buy and sell, and he was doing sort of shapes of what they call shapes of 10 million. So he was selling, say, 10 million euros against the dollar and saying buy when he meant sell. Oh my goodness.
And English wasn't his first language. And you would arguably say English isn't my first language, but we got on well. And the way we sort of solved that was we just went out for lunch, had a long lunch together, and I went through the basics of the Forex market. And
so a quick crash course in buying and selling.
A quick crash course, which he said at the end of it, he wasn't so sure at the beginning. where the conversation was going to go, but at the end of it, we had the basics nailed down.
Amazing.
So the foundation work was done over lunch and a couple of gin and tonics.
Okay, good. A few. So you managed to save his bacon and hopefully a few
millions. Times. Yeah, quite a few times.
Goodness me. Now, I mean, obviously, it can be volatile in the market. What are the potential pitfalls for high net worth individuals when thinking about investments?
Well, I suppose the main pitfall is the cost. If they don't keep track of the cost of the underlying investment, that can absolutely affect their well-being and the wealth many years down the line. But nowadays they get a thing called the cost and charges report, which is like a yearly summary of every single charge.
Yes.
But one of the things that's not in there is, and it's quite difficult to get your head around at first, but if you're buying and selling any investment, there's always what they call a friction cost. And that could be 0.5%, 0.2% on a trade, and it's not necessarily declared in the cost and charges.
So that's just eating away at every
just
trade.
Constantly eating away.
Right.
And why it's important and why Warren Buffett is where he is today is because he said, do not trade too often.
Right.
And if you listen to high net worths and ultra high net worths, I'm not sure they all read the Warren Buffett book at the same time, but they've all come to the conclusion, especially later in life, once they get into 35, 40, they tend not to trade too often at all.
Right.
And that just brings, it might only be an extra 0.5% a year, the saving, but cost compounds. So if they're saving 0.5% on a bigger pot each year,
that's a significant
it's a
saving.
Significant amount of money.
And that's going to compound over the years.
Absolutely. But costs and charges, it's all detailed there. But just to put numbers around it, costs and charges from a private bank perspective, if they're running a discretionary portfolio for you, can be 2%, 2.2%. And that's everything. That's commission, portfolio management fee, all the sundry charges, all the research. 2% of a big figure is a big amount of money.
It's a big amount of money, isn't it? Yeah. So, I mean, I know you're looking after many clients, and so a lot of responsibility there.
Yeah.
You mentioned well-being earlier. What do you do for your own well-being? Obviously, you're managing this huge responsibility of other people's assets. What do you do to relax? What do you do to help yourself with your own well-being? So
we go to the Martial Arts Hut in Leeds, and we do Krav Maga, which is quite different from Shotokan.
Okay. Tell me a bit more about Krav Maga.
Krav Maga is more about how, if your back's up against the wall, what can I do quickly to get out of the situation?
Okay.
And as quickly as possible, just to get yourself
to
away.
To
escape almost. And it's the old mantra, if they come with a serious weapon, the first number one rule is run.
Okay.
That's the number one rule that you get through Shotokan, you get through Krav Maga. Thankfully they all tell you the same thing.
So run away rather than try
Run
and
away
fight.
rather than face. This is only when you're up against your back's up against the wall. But the great thing is watching kids again at sort of 12 engaging with Krav Maga the way I did when I was that age.
And have you ever had to use it?
No.
Okay, well, thank goodness for that. Let's hope it never comes to that, but at least you'll be prepared, ready. I wouldn't want to meet you in a dark night, put it that way. Looks quite interesting. I have seen people sort of wrestling at the gym, I think they're doing Krav Maga, trying to get out of holes and things, it looks quite challenging. Now, what other exercise activity or health activity do you do?
We run there's a park run in Leeds, Saturdays and Sundays, alternate months. And that's quite a fun thing to do because there's people of all ages. Yeah. And what I'm seeing now is quite a lot of mums and dads coming with their 12-year-olds and they're running maybe 1K, 2K. Leeds, where I live, there's quite a lot of families I don't know if there's something in the water in Leeds and Yorkshire, but people take their sport quite seriously.
Yeah, definitely.
There's cricket, there's rugby union, there's golf, and I would say it's the most sporty sort of shire there is in England.
Interesting. I trained in Leeds and I live there, and I agree with you. There's definitely a northern grit that comes out in sports.
Definitely.
It was always dangerous playing rugby with the consultants in Leeds because they were absolutely lethal on the pitch. And we've talked about the benefits of exercise. Tell me about your diet and nutrition side of things.
Yeah, so recently I've started looking more at what's within foods. I've read a little bit, probably not enough, but I've read a little bit about the dangers of red meat, which to me is quite important to try and avoid as much as possible. Not that I ever drank very much, but I've started been a complete convert to zero alcohol in the pub.
Okay, yeah,
And,
interesting.
and I'm an investor in the sector, I have been for years, and I've started realising that a lot of people now, about 30% of the people at pubs in the UK are not taking any alcohol
That's
at all.
it. Everyone's really clocked on to lowering the calorie
Absolutely.
intake, dead calories,
Yeah.
reducing alcohol intake.
Yeah. When I worked in Zurich, they were opening dry bars, and I jokingly said to
Interesting.
them, never open one in Glasgow, it'll go bust. But I've actually taken that back. I think actually a dry bar in Glasgow
Amazing.
might actually go down quite well, because a lot of people want to just go out in the night. And after Costa closes at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock,
Yeah.
there isn't that many other places you can go as a female or somebody who just wants a quiet night.
Exactly. And I think, not everyone wants to just, down 100 units.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny because nutrition is so important at Dr. Finley's, and we have an in-house nutritional therapist. We're very nutritional, and you are what you eat.
Yeah.
Interesting you mentioned red meat there, actually, because the research on red meat actually was more about processed red meat than good, healthy, lean red meat. So I'm a big fan of meat, actually, but in the right form. And to clarify, there's an association between processed red meat like burgers and bowel cancer, not a direct causal link, but that sort of processing puts all the wrong stuff into what could be a very healthy diet. So I'm more of a paleo guy. Actually, I love my meat, but in the right form, locally sourced, organic, lean. I love a good steak. Do you like a steak?
I love a good steak, but the other area I'm sort of concentrating a lot on now, I've started looking at just how much sugar is in everything.
Absolutely.
There's one or two, I won't mention names, there's one or two well-known coffee houses, and when I look at it, I intuitively know now about 80-90% of the product is just full of sugar to a ridiculous level.
Absolutely, and it's just pushed into things. What's nice is to see some brands actually reducing their sugar, like ketchup. They've been secretly reducing the salt and sugar content over many years, not making a big fanfare. Other people are doing the opposite, pushing it into food, and it's just creating this mass pandemic of diabetes and heart disease, which I know is really rife in Glasgow. The crazy thing about Glasgow is on some estates of Glasgow they have the lowest average life expectancy for a man, 53 average, compared with 83 in some areas of Chelsea. So the disparities there are huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's interesting that you're into nutrition coming from that area.
Yeah, well, I mean, we were always brought up to watch what we eat. We stayed in a nice new estate within Cumbernauld, which is a new town. So we're far from the madding crowd in the city centre of Glasgow. But we did find that just through parental sort of guidance over the years, we were very careful. We never ate at chip shops. We just never touched sweets that often. We were always told sweets was a treat. So it was kind of, there was stuff filtering down all the time. We were always taught that porridge was the best for you to start the day. And then you look at my grandfather's side, and they went to 90, and they were eating 3 meals a day and no snacking between. We don't know where that came from, because he wasn't army based, but somehow or other it was religiously breakfast, noon and dinner, didn't eat in between at all.
And porridge naturally reduces cholesterol, great source of fibre, slow release carbs. So actually the Scots got that right, and a fantastic way to start the day, a warming meal when it's freezing cold outside.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, we're talking health versus wealth. How important would you say, all these health habits are for success in business, in your experience with your client base?
I would say very important. I would say if you're feeling unstressed, if you're looking after your health, chances are you're not that stressed or stressed as you could be. If you're de-stressed, it's a great time to look at investments. There is a mantra in the markets, if you listen to people who've been doing it for years, never make decisions on investments when you're full of emotion.
So or an empty stomach.
Or an empty stomach, or not having enough liquid water. So if you look now at the younger traders and investors, they have bottles of water next to them, they go running. There's definitely a realisation that your mind can guide how successful you are in life, and if you look after your mental health, you'll probably do better.
And I think feeding the body and the brain is going to lead to better decisions, better awareness, better function all round.
Absolutely.
So it's really interesting to see that you're so passionate about health alongside wealth, and I know that it really resonates with Dr. Finley's. We really do that preventative thing. We look at actually the habits that we talked about there. Because the things that we do regularly, are what we become.
Yeah.
Now, Alan, we both look after high net worth individuals. What are the habits of organisation that you've noted in your clients that are beneficial?
Well, if you were to look at the whole situation in the football world, it's all about the bench. So what high net worth clients do better than anyone I've seen is they organise a bench early. So they have, by bench, I mean some of the best advisors in accountancy. They have very good family solicitors that they travel with right through their life.
Okay, so
and
continuity.
Continuity is key. And also they don't necessarily go for the top 5 solicitors or the top 5 accountants. Sometimes they'll go for the middle ranking solicitor or accountant because they are more hungry.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So you think that middle rank actually will deliver more in terms of that personal continuity service?
Yeah, there is a worry amongst the high net worth community that if you go to, say, the top 5 solicitor in any sector or any specialism, they become a victim of their own success and they have less and less time because the client book just gets bigger and bigger. Yes. Whereas with an up-and-coming regional expert, A, you get a fantastic level of service, and B, there really is a hunger there to service at a very comprehensive level.
Very interesting. And continuity and service are things that are really important in both our worlds, that personal level of service. Yeah,
it doesn't happen, I think, so much in the medical side, but on our side, we have a lot of high net worth clients that introduce their sons and daughters to this bench.
Interesting.
So that there's a continuity going into the next generation. And they explain how important it is as advisors. A lot of these advisors spend times with the sons and daughters, sometimes days on end, when you add it all up, explaining that they need to have a will, that they need to have investments in place, that they need a cash reserve, that they probably need 3 tiers to the cash reserve. Coming out of university, they've got a spend habit. And a lot of them don't realise you actually need 3 tiers to your cash.
Yeah.
You need to avoid credit cards. Everyone kind of knows that. But they forget that you probably need an immediate cash reserve, a medium-term cash reserve, and a long-term cash reserve. And those 3, if you get them in place early through a standing order, which a lot of the high net worth clients do, they save religiously every month into tax efficient investments. That builds up to a nice pot at the end of 25 or 40 years.
Fantastic. And I guess it's a bit similar to having that relationship with a GP who's trusted, who knows the whole family.
Exactly.
And these things aren't taught in school.
No.
So you need that trusted expert to be guiding you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know I learned a lot from my dad, who was an accountant, just by listening to him.
Yeah.
When he was on the telephone, I sneaking in to listen to his meetings with his financial advisors.
So one of the things we're doing at Walker Cripps is taking the investment world into schools. So we're talking to a lot of sixth forms, comprehensives and private schools up and down the country, and we're teaching the basics of investments. We're also holding an investment competition. So they've got to pick 10 stocks.
Oh, great fun.
And they'll be able to see on their CV whether they were the winner or the runner-up. But this would be the foot in the door for some of these kids or pupils to get into the City of London.
What a great idea.
Yeah.
And I know we've talked about a joint event in the future where we might both talk about health and wealth on the stage together, and these things go hand in hand, so it's fantastic to hear that education is a big part of your portfolio.
Absolutely.
Now, Alan, we are in a post-pandemic era. The economy seems quite up and down. There's a bit of a squeeze going on. How is that affecting the psychology and behaviour of investors?
So a lot of clients are still quite nervous about committing to markets. But there's 2 interesting factors coming through from the discussions. One of them is that they are prepared to look at a middle ground rather than just sit in cash, which they will do if they're nervous. If they're not so nervous, they'll put quite a bit of money into equities. Quite a lot of them at the moment are going for the middle ground of maybe buying government gilts.
Okay.
And there's tax efficiencies around some of those that are shorter dated.
A bit of a safer bet, is it?
They're a bit of a safer bet, and it kind of feels right for some of them because there's tax efficiencies if you're buying shorter dated, less than 5 years to redemption. If you're buying them below 100, say at 92, and they redeem at 100, that's a tax-free capital gain for an individual. And a lot of them are saying, if the running yield on that is 5% a year, and most of it is tax-free, why wouldn't I?
Yeah.
So they are going for sort of middle grounds, and I think eventually what will happen is the UK equity market's got so cheap, ridiculously cheap, on a P of 8, a lot of stocks now. Normally we trade 12 to 16. A lot of them I think will eventually drift back towards UK equities. UK equity weightings, as you'll see through all the financial press, is at a multi-decade low pension funds used to hold 55% in UK equities. It's now 5%.
Wow.
Because they went off and fell in love with global equities, which was particularly America, and it was particularly technology, and that worked for pretty much into 2010, right to the current day. But at some point, I think the pendulum might well swing back and people start to look for value again. And certainly UK market is about as cheap as it's been in many decades.
It's really interesting that the psychology here is though sort of taking a sort of safe middle ground position, and people are very much doing the same in our health sector. We're finding people are actually wanting to protect their health, wanting to have a health check, wanting to make sure they're protecting their health so that they can enjoy their wealth, and maybe being a little bit safer and more cautious rather than being, throwing caution to the wind.
Well, the argument at the moment is, why would I chase 8% yield or return from an equity when I can get 5% from a UK government gilt, which is backed by UK government and it's still rated AA?
So it's a good safe bet.
Yeah.
Now, as the global economy picks up again, how do you see the landscape changing? What will happen then?
Well, I think in terms of investor behaviour, there's two areas they'll be drawn back to, I think. One is equity income, so those are stocks that are maybe yielding 4 or 5%, that are reasonably well covered by profits, so the company can afford to pay the 4 or 5%. The other area is the investment trust market, which has been around for hundreds of years, arguably started by the Scots, although that's up for debate. But the investment trust world's become very, very interesting. I was talking earlier about how much people have reduced their UK equity positions, and now we're seeing discounts in investment trusts of 15%, 1.5, which is close to sort of all-time highs. And at some point, paying 85p in the pound for something that's worth a pound, and if that market takes off again, which it might, you're getting a sort of double whammy effect. And I think at some point people will drift back towards these deeply discounted investment trusts that have reasonable track records.
Finally, do you have any other advice or tips for people who want to work on their health and their wealth?
In terms of the wealth aspect, I would say, cover off the basics. Make sure you have your pension fund allowance. 60,000 for some people isn't that much money, is for others. But there are, you can go back 3 years and do 3 lots of 40,000. So you can build up, if you have left your pensions too late in terms of planning and investing, you can actually invest quite a bit of money in 1 year.
So you can back pay that?
You can back pay for 3 years at 40,000 a year. Plus you have 60,000 in the current year, which has just recently been raised. Plus you have the ISA allowance, which is quite generous these days. Keeping it in a tax efficient framework is probably the best thing you can do for long-term wealth. Not forgetting even cash ISAs rather than just sitting with surplus cash in there. But the number one takeaway, I think, for a lot of clients should be that they have to address the cost issue. If their costs and charges each year, the schedules coming through from the advisor is 2%, they can probably easily get that down to 1% by just looking at ETFs or direct equities or direct bonds, but they will need an advisor to help them manage that.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing from you is you've got to get your bench right, and you've got to be tax efficient over the years, and prevent the erosion of your wealth. And hopefully you'll have the health when you get there to spend it, which is what we're all about on this podcast, which is health versus wealth. Alan, it's been lovely having you on the show. It's been really interesting talking about all these things today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and I hope you have a safe journey back to Yorkshire.
So that's it for today. I hope my guest and I have helped you meet some of your health versus wealth challenges. Now, to hear more from me, Dr. Ben, why not subscribe on your usual podcast platform? And if you like my advice or you'd like to be a guest on the show, you can email me on podcast@drfinlays.co.uk. Anyway, I hope to see you again, but for now, it's goodbye from me, Dr. Ben.